went to visit my sister over spring break this year. She was like, hey, do you want to see the new Snow White? My sister's into musical theater and had seen the newest adaptation of West Side Story, so she was mostly in it for Rachel Zegler. I was in on it because everything I'd seen about this movie looked absolutely awful, and being the person I am on here, I feel like some of y'all would be interested in hearing my thoughts on it anyways. So we went on discount day, which was ironically also April Fool's Day, and I have lots of thoughts. Some that might surprise people, honestly. I feel like I should start this by first talking about the original movie. My sister and I rewatched it the night before we went, just so we would have it fresh in our brains before going to see the new one. So let's talk about it. The original Snow White was released in 1937, and one could assume that a lot of elements of the movie would be a product of its time, and they'd be right. Snow White's motivations aren't too heavily explored, though to be quite frank, there's not a lot explained in this movie. It leaves a lot of room for fleshing out, which the live-action remake takes full advantage of, but we'll get into that after. And her wants and needs amount to hoping one day she'll be able to marry a prince and find her true love, which, fun thing to keep in mind, Snow White in this movie is canonically 13. My sister's headcanon is that Snow and the prince in the original film are the Romeo and Juliet ages, she being 13 and the prince being 17. Doesn't make that whole predicament any better, but her motivation at least makes sense when you remember this is a young girl, and as someone who grew up as a young girl and knew young girls, talking about boys and crushing on a guy you haven't met yet is fairly par for the course. Snow's age aside, one thing I feel people should keep in mind with a movie like the original Snow White is that I don't believe Walt was really trying to make a groundbreaking story. He wasn't trying to do any big twists on the original story like later Disney films might do. Even the non-princess films that were based on pre-existing material weren't a whole lot different from the books, aside from changes made to make the films more family-friendly. Point is, I don't think Walt was busy trying to make Snow White topical or groundbreaking. He was just trying to get over that first hurdle of getting people to go to the theater to see what was basically a 90-minute cartoon at the time. Aside from films like The Adventures of Prince Ahmed, which was made in the 20s, I don't believe any animated films of this length had been released theatrically. Snow White was simply a story that Walt liked and thought would be a great foray into feature film and length animation. Another thing one should consider is something I don't think I've seen talked about when it comes to the conversation of, is Disney going woke or were the original movies just that bad? Which is the princesses being the main characters of their movies wasn't really a thing until the Disney Renaissance. Aside from Cinderella, of course, the princess films weren't about the titular character. People have argued for years now about how the real protagonists of Sleeping Beauty are the three fairies as they try to raise Aurora and argue about parenting methods and living without magic, as well as trying to help Philip save her once all their curse prevention ends up not working. The same goes for Snow White, I feel. Sure, she gets a lot of screen time in the beginning, but I'd argue that's just to set up her character and explain why she has to run away into the woods and hide out with the 7 dwarves in their cottage. It's like how in Journey to the West, Tripitaka is technically the protagonist, but we need to take a few chapters before he shows up to establish the backstory of Monkey King so we know what the deal is with one of his 3 sidekicks. Yeah, I'll say it. Snow White is to the 1937 film what Monkey King is to Journey to the West. Really, the dwarves are the ones who have the character arc in this movie. More specifically, Grumpy, who over the course of the day learns to trust Snow and not be so toxically masculine. You might call that grasping at straws, but he quite literally starts off not trusting Snow White because of the sole fact that she's a woman, that her wiles will bewitch them in some way and that they should kick her out. Snow tries to convince them to let her stay because she'll be a big help around the house, because as established when she first found the cottage, the dwarves do not know how to take care of themselves. There's piles of dishes in the sink, a stocking left on the table, the broom hasn't been touched in so long that it's got cobwebs, it's disgusting. So she offers to do the cleaning, sewing, cooking, the works. The way to a dwarf's heart is with gooseberry pie, it seems. In addition to Grumpy's distrust of her solely based on her gender, one of the songs that didn't make it into the remake, again I'll talk about the remake later, is about the dwarves washing up before dinner. Snow White discovers that they haven't washed their hands in possibly a while, which is gross. Snow White has to talk them into doing so before they eat, so they get a song about washing up before dinner and how to wash their hands and stuff. It's silly, I like it. And during this song, Grumpy refuses to wash up, his reasoning being that it's too girly for him and he's a man's man and isn't gonna do that. He even goes as far as to make fun of the other dwarves, about how they'll start wearing perfume and tying ribbons in their beards and stuff. For a movie made in the 30s, it does a great job of reminding me of men today who make posts on the internet where everyone can see about how they don't wipe themselves after using the bathroom because it's gay to do that. It's not. You stink. It's not gay to wash your butt. The dwarves eventually are able to make him wash up, and then they eat dinner. Later that night, the dwarves decide to be chivalrous and let Snow White sleep in their beds for the night, and they'll sleep downstairs, which results in some slapstick humor about their chosen sleeping arrangements. But the important thing is how Snow White prays before she goes to bed, which, yeah, product of its time. Also, this is the medieval period, there's probably Christianity, and she thanks the dwarves for letting her stay and prays that Grumpy will grow to like her eventually. And Grumpy overhears this. He scoffs about it before going to bed, but the next morning begrudgingly tells her to stay safe and don't be stupid before they head off to work in the mines. We know how this goes. The evil queen shows up with a poison apple, Snow White dies, the dwarves arrive home just a moment too late to save her, so they do the only thing they can do and chase after the queen to avenge Snow. The queen dies, the dwarves hold a wake for Snow White. Grumpy is openly sobbing in the corner where the other dwarves can't see, again, tying into his arc. At the start of the movie, we never expect Grumpy of all dwarves to be this distraught over Snow. He starts the movie absolutely despising the fact that they have to house her, even if she's offered to cook and clean for them. And now he's crying for her as if she were his own daughter. And then we know how the story ends. They put Snow in the glass coffin because they couldn't bring themselves to bury her. The prince arrives and kisses her as a little goodbye because everyone thinks she's dead. And she wakes up and has her happily ever after. Yippee! So there it is. That's the original Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I guess what I want to get across here is that a lot of people assume Snow White, being the character the movie is named for, is the main character, and how dare they not give her proper motivations and an arc, when in fact the movie seems to focus more on the dwarves and their character arcs, learning how to take better care of themselves and therefore Snow White. They basically all become her uncles, and Grumpy in particular learns to truly care for Snow White and stop being as, well, grumpy. This is something I feel Disney did not take into account when making the live-action remake. Now, there's something I want to mention before I get to talking about this movie, and it's something that I briefly mentioned my views on in the part 1 of my Wish video, but I didn't get a lot of time to delve into it because I had way more important things to talk about in that behemoth. That being the topic of casting certain actors who may not share the same demographic as the character they're auditioning for. In a perfect world, this segment would be like a minute long, and it'd begin and end with cast whoever's the best for the role as long as it's not like race-bending a historical figure who is a real person in a meant-to-be-accurate historical piece of media. I include meant-to-be-accurate because Hamilton is an outlier and shouldn't be counted. And even then, I know a handful of totally normal people would come at me about it, so I feel like I gotta throw some kind of book at them to defend myself. My opinion is... well, it feels like a case-by-case situation. A lot of roles I feel should be cast regardless of a person's background or race or disability or what have you. For me, it comes down to this question. Does it matter? Not in a delicate snowflake kind of way, although I am saying that too, just politely, but in a more media analysis way. I'm asking whether or not this element of the character affects the overall themes of the story. Does Ariel being white affect the way her story and character play out? Does her instead being black change it, or can any girl of any race feel a need to leave her current life behind and run away from her family who doesn't understand her? Does Peter Pan need to be a white boy for his story to make sense? Would him instead being Indian change that? Or can Peter Pan be of any color, because little boys all over the world have all shared the wish to never have to grow up? Also, Indian people have been traveling to Britain and even living there since at least the 1800s, so Peter being Indian wouldn't have been far-fetched. And Alexander Maloney was born and raised in England, and I feel implying he can't be Peter because he's not quote-unquote fully English is worse than whatever brownie points Disney might be out to earn by swapping Peter's race. And finally, does a princess living in a kingdom inspired by Germany, but not explicitly set in real-world Germany because medieval Germany did not have raccoons, or sorcerer queens, or magical dwarves, need to be white? Or can she be of any race because this is a fictional kingdom and we don't need to adhere 100% to whatever history everyone wants this movie to adhere to? All this to say, Rachel Zegler was the best part of this movie, die mad. I feel like I talked myself into a corner initially when I made this video, so I'm gonna keep this even more brief than the last time. So brief that I'm not gonna go much further than that, because honestly, the kind of people who have this big of a problem with Snow White being played by a non-white actress are not the kind of people you should try to argue with in good faith. They may try to argue accuracy or whatever, but you know the real reason they have an issue with it. It is a fairy tale film with barely any basis in reality. Grow up. Oh, but Snow White's whole thing is she's named for her skin as white as snow. Well, guess what, Chucklenuts? That point doesn't apply. The remake takes this into account when giving her a more fleshed out backstory. So in this version, she's named Snow White because she was born during a blizzard that left the king and queen snowed into their royal carriage, not because she was pale as snow. Checkmate. Also, we're ignoring Rachel's political views for this video. I know someone is gonna bring it up like some kind of smoking gun, but I'm talking about the movie itself and the movie's problems, not its lead's Twitter account. We're all really good at separating an actor's performance in a movie and the movie itself from their political views and how they are as a person IRL. Why is it all of a sudden impossible now? What I won't ignore is the argument about her thinking the original Snow White is bad and didn't age well. More specifically, that the remake she's involved with improved on it and is way better. People were arguing that she was speaking out of turn, and Disney was all like, oh no, why would you say that? No one's gonna see our movie now. Let's forget about the fact that I can't even find a source saying that Disney was upset about her comments on the original. Regardless of that, people are still spreading this quote-unquote factoid around as if Disney doesn't agree with Rachel. And to that I say, did y'all not see the marketing for these live-action remakes for the last decade? Marketing might not be the right word, but it's the closest I can think of. Even if you don't see it blatantly said in interviews or anything, you see it in the response people have to these remakes. Even stuff like Aladdin or Beauty and the Beast, where they barely changed anything, they still made little tweaks as an excuse to say it's improving the original movie. Because Snow White is such an old movie, I feel like they just felt they were able to say the quiet part out loud about this one, especially in the marketing department. Snow White does seem like the more popular princess to point at when making criticism of the Disney princesses, after all. So no, I don't think Rachel was speaking out of turn or whatever. I think she was just saying what Disney's marketing department wanted her to say to get people to see the movie, and then she got thrown under the bus once it didn't go over well with the public. I don't think this is a Tom Holland accidentally spoils Infinity War situation, guys. I think this is just what they thought would get people to see the movie. On the topic of this notion I see a lot about Disney fixing the original movies, it feels very icky. Even if a friend of me did enjoy the Beauty and the Beast remake and how it fleshed out Gaston more and said the quiet part out loud about the whole, oh, Belle's so pretty, it's the same she reads and isn't a normal woman who wants to get married and have babies. It's still really weird to have your main marketing with these things be about how you're fixing the original. As if there was something wrong with these groundbreaking and award-winning films. Beauty and the Beast is one of 2 animated features to be nominated for Best Picture, for Pete's sake. Are you gonna try and tell me there was something to fix? That's one reason why I'm inclined to not like these remakes on principle. Even if a movie like the 1937 Snow White does have elements that didn't age well, it's that and one other thing. If it's true you're making these remakes to fix the mistakes in the original, and these aren't just for money and nostalgia bait reasons, why does fixing it have to be done in live action? Why not reanimate the movie with your new animation technology? Make it something that Walt would have been proud to see done, something Walt could have never dreamed of doing with the animation technology available to him at the time. Anyone could make a live-action Snow White. In fact, someone did do that before 1937. But Walt animated it with hand-painted cells, and it's now one of the most important films animation has ever known. Why then does fixing it require you to make it in a film medium that anyone could have made it in? This implies some rather interesting opinions that modern Disney may or may not hold about animation as a medium, and it's a reason why I will always go into one of these live-action remakes with low expectations. Alright, with that out of the way, let's start talking about the actual Snow White remake. I'm gonna try and be quick about this, because I want to get to my thoughts on the film itself and not just dwell on this. Snow White's backstory is fleshed out in the remake by talking about her father and mother. As previously mentioned, Snow White is named such because she was born during a blizzard, and her parents raised her to be kind to everyone. They took a central element of Snow's character in the original and fleshed it out here, which I like. I mean, if this thing has to exist, at least they kinda tried to use stuff from the original. Enjoy that while you can, you're not gonna see it all that much. The opening number, Where the Good Things Grow, establishes that the kingdom is rather prosperous. Everyone helps everyone here, and even the royal family will partake in activities like apple picking or baking pies for everyone. This kingdom also has a lot of gemstones that they mine as well. This opener is rather good. The original music for this movie was written by Ben Pasek and Justin Paul, names you might recognize from The Greatest Showman and Dear Evan Hansen. Credit where credit is due. The original songs are good, for the most part, and they feel like musical theater numbers. Yay, the bare minimum! Though take my opinions with a grain of salt, I'm the person here who thought most of the songs from Wish were passable, and I haven't seen Calaxon's video on Waiting on a Wish yet, so who knows, there might be some music theory stuff I didn't pick up on that makes the soundtrack bad, actually. Also, it's established that Snow's dad gave her a heart necklace with the words fearless, fair, brave, and true on it. It's giving the FBI sword in Mulan 2020. This necklace is important, I guess. It embodies the movie's entire theme that it's going for, but the trinket itself isn't too important until later. Anyways, when Snow's mother inevitably passes away, the evil queen shows up. It's established right away that she knows magic, and everyone knows this. And they explain away her having powers by saying that she's so beautiful it seems to give her magic? I think it's a play on how the queen only sees value in people if they're beautiful and good looking, and that's the only way she has power over anyone, but it's weird. Very weird. The king is won over because the evil queen puts on this facade of being kind, but we quickly find out that she is not. The father goes to war and never returns. The queen takes over, forcing the farmers to be soldiers while fully taking advantage of the land being rich with jewels. That's all she allows the people to do anymore. There's barely any food for the people because all the farmers are being forced to do other things, and any food that is grown is just for the queen and her loyal palace staff. And just like the original, Snow White is forced to be a scullery maid. And then we get introduced to the love interest. I genuinely can't remember his name. Hold on a second. Jonathan, right, that's the guy. He's not a prince. In fact, he's part of a band of bandits who fight in the name of the original king, which is also not what he is. They're not proper bandits. They're a theater troupe that lost their job because of the queen's manufactured famine and economic crash, so they had to turn to thievery to make ends meet. I think that's hilarious. All they needed was to get Joey Beatty to play him, and he probably would have been my favorite character in the film. Too bad Jonathan is the most insufferable male love interest I've ever seen in a Disney movie. I get the feeling they wanted to make him a Flynn Rider-esque character, with him being witty and a bit of a bad boy, someone with a bit more personality than the guy in the original 1937 film. His introduction is Snow White catching him stealing potatoes from the kitchen, after all, but they seem to forget that you can't just make the guy sarcastic and butt heads with the main girl. Flynn still had moments where he enjoyed being around Rapunzel and, liked her. Jonathan has an entire song about, oh boo-hoo, people aren't nice anymore, grow up, to an actual abuse victim. And he knows by this point in the film, he knows that she's the princess, he saw her working as a maid under the queen, he knows that she's been living under her stepmother's thumb just like the rest of them.
I know my father.
Your father.
And he still says this to her! I'm left feeling like the only reason he doesn't blow her off is because she's the princess, the daughter of the old king that they fight in the name of, and they can use her support in their fight against the evil queen. The original prince may not have had enough screen time to be memorable, but this guy has enough screen time for me to know that I hate him. Also, don't ask me about any of his other bandit friends, I don't remember a thing about them. There was one who had a crossbow, but it was stolen, so he uses a slingshot instead, and that's the whole joke. Even when watching Wish for the first time, I still remembered all the 7 friends' names. How did you write the side character band of friends worse than Wish? Anyways, even though Snow White doesn't rat him out when she catches him stealing food, he still gets caught by the huntsman. He's originally going to be locked in the dungeon, but Snow's like, Your Highness, wait, he was only stealing food. Shouldn't he get a less extreme punishment? The queen, being awful, decides to give him a different punishment, tying him to the front gates of the castle to die of exposure. And once everyone leaves the room and Snow is left to her thoughts, we get the new I Want song, Waiting on a Wish. I thought it was fine. I couldn't remember a single melody from it after leaving the theater, but I remember it being alright. And as said before, Rachel singing in this film was spectacular, so the performance itself was great. It's giving reflection, but a more energetic reflection. The whole song is about her wondering if she can ever live up to her father's wants for her, if she can ever be a good leader, or if she'll be stuck under the queen's thumb forever, watching her hurt the people that she dearly cares about. Will she be able to be the girl she was meant to be? Or will she be stuck wishing she could be? I only wish the cinematography was more interesting. It's not a live stage musical, it's a film where you can control everything put to screen, you can get more creative with how things look. The only time this number gets interesting with the shots at angles is when it jumps between Snow doing her chores around the palace and the shots change to the beat of her throwing down laundry or slamming down a sponge to clean the floor. Give me more of that! There's 40 seconds of singing where it's just the same shot of Snow on the walls of the palace singing to no one. The camera swivels up and down, sure, but nothing else happens. 40 seconds out of a 3-minute and 18-second song. That's 20% of the song spent on one camera angle. A friend pointed out that that might be because she's such a good singer they were able to get it in one take and they wanted to show that, but it's still boring. After the song, Snow frees Jonathan from his restraints when no one's looking, and he's able to escape. Why did they tie him with ropes though? Like, if you really meant to keep him there to die, why not use chains? Maybe the queen was just that confident in her ability to strike fear into the people that she thought no one would dare try to free him. Either way, Snow should have left him there. Both because it means I wouldn't have to deal with Jonathan's nonsense later in this movie, and because the queen sees this happen, and that's the inciting incident that gets her to order the huntsman to kill Snow White. I remember my sister mentioning how strange it is that Snow White is allowed to wear such a nice dress when the huntsman takes her to pick flowers and kill her, considering how she's only been allowed to wear rags up until this point. At least in the original movie, there was enough left ambiguous about the relationship between Snow and the Queen that you could just chalk it up to maybe she does it so Snow is lured into a false sense of security, because it's not like she's done anything super awful to her. She's just made her do chores in rags, but like, she hasn't actively abused her or anything. Maybe for this special occasion, she lets her stepdaughter wear something nice for her day off from slave labor. In this film, there's a scene where Snow flinches when the Queen goes to cradle her face. It's very clear that this woman is awful to her, and thus the new dress makes even less sense. The huntsman in the original film doesn't go through with the murder because he, rightfully so, realizes that he can't just kill a 13-year-old whose only crime was being kind and pretty. In this movie, it's because Snow offers him one of the apples she's picked, and he's so touched by her kindness, despite everything, that he can't bring himself to kill her. This change would have been fine, and I only call it dumb because it sets up a really stupid change they made later in the film. So there's that box that the Queen gives the huntsman so he can cut out Snow's heart and put it in there to prove that he got the job done, right? In the original, the huntsman cuts out the heart of a pig to present to the Queen in hopes she never realizes Snow's still alive. And it's not like they show it ever in the film, they just kind of like have it open. It's shot from an angle where you can't see the inside of the box, but people talk about, oh, the heart of a pig! In the remake, the mirror reveals that Snow is still alive, and the Queen opens the box and she pulls out the same apple that the huntsman was given by Snow. First of all, you're telling me she didn't open that box once to check to see that he actually put Snow's heart in it? That's something the original got right, at least. You could argue the same as the ropes thing, where she's so confident in her ruling power that she doesn't think the huntsman would dare defy her, but it stops being believable with this one and starts making her look stupid. Second, come on, put the pig heart in the new movie. How sick would that have been to see the Queen pull out a heart when examining the box? I only believe they didn't do that because modern Disney makes movies like this to reach the lowest common denominator, and they don't want to risk alienating little kids by being remotely adult. And we can't have the pig heart even in reference and not actually shown on screen. We gotta make it family friendly. Boo! Before Snow runs off, the huntsman says a quick thing about how the Queen lied about what happened to Snow's father. I'll say it here so as to not keep you in suspense. The Queen killed him. They never explain how, they just tell you that the Queen killed him. For a movie that took a lot of time to flesh out everything else about Snow's story, I feel like this is something that doesn't get enough attention. Did she stab him to death and then dump the body where it couldn't be found? Did she purposefully send him off to war or somewhere where she'd set up a trap for him so he'd die? Did she pull a 12 Dancing Princesses and poison him? That'd be fitting for her since, you know, apple. They never say what happened, and the huntsman doesn't tell Snow either because he said too much and he doesn't have time to explain and she needs to run now, which, it's 3 words. Just say she killed him and then Snow can run without being left wondering what happened to her dad. Though I guess if he did that, Snow wouldn't feel determined enough to meet back up with the potato thief love interest to see if he knows where her dad is or something. I don't know. So Snow runs into the woods and it's way less cool. The lighting feels too bright and they decide to have the branches more literally reach out to grab her instead of what happens in the original where the branches simply catch on Snow's dress and she's so scared that she imagines the branches as grasping hands in her fit of fear. Eventually, Snow runs and falls into the river and is swept downstream until she's able to get up and out, and then finds a deer. The only credit I'll give this downgrade of a scene is only the deer's eyes are visible in the darkness before Snow realizes it's not some dangerous animal. And the way they render the eyes makes it look more like an alligator, so that's kinda neat. Anyways, she gives the deer a now soggy piece of bread that she had on her, and then she follows it as it and other animals kinda just lead her to the dwarf's house. Now, in terms of the scene of her being led to the house itself, in the original, you had Snow sitting for a second to recuperate and interact with the animals before she herself was like, "Do you know where I could stay for the night?" The scene made sense. But this feels like they were going down a list like, okay, she's done the running around scared in the woods bit, now the animals need to lead her to the cabin, without much more thought to it. They needed more time for the bajillion new things they added to the film, I suppose. Also, if it's not obvious, the number smile in a song doesn't appear in this movie. We've got no time for a song meant to make people less sad during the Great Depression because that's one of the reasons why Snow is so kind and happy despite all the stuff she's gone through. She's meant to help people be less sad during the Great Depression. That's too unrealistic for our new and better Snow White, even though we're literally working with the message of being kind to each other even in dark and desperate situations, and we could have easily retooled this song to fit perfectly within those themes. They did keep Hi-Ho though. It's one of the 3 songs from the original they kept, though the songs had almost all their lyrics rewritten, and in Silly Song's case, it's only a minute long and the lyrics are gone. It's just yodeling, and they don't even have Grumpy playing the sick wood-carved organ. They did a live-action Lion King Be Prepared to this thing. So I say they barely count as being reused. Hi-Ho's new lyrics lyrics include establishing the dwarves better because Lord knows the rest of this dumpster fire doesn't take the time to help you to get to know them. Also, there's a detail they establish in the song about how the dwarves have magic hands that make the ore veins in the rocks light up so they can more easily mine the earth. I'd like to think I take note of foreshadowing a little better than some people since, you know, writing is something I do sometimes, so I thought for sure this would come back later. Like, maybe since they tried so hard to market this movie as Snow White, but she takes charge and saves herself, maybe the evil queen would kidnap the dwarves for her own benefit and Snow would have to save them. They've already established that the queen is working her people to the bone to mine the earth for all it has, so maybe they've mined all the jewels they can and she'd be desperate for a way to find more. And hey, these 7 magical dwarves have magic hands that make the ore veins in the rocks light up. That's a perfect way for her to find more jewels for her own benefit. But nah, this literally only applies to this one musical number. The magic hands don't come back up ever again. Also, I know this is a cold take, but why did the dwarves need to be CG? I was there for the whole backlash that happened when Disney said they'd cast live actors with dwarfism, so I understand why they went this route instead, but they look uncanny and awful. And my theory is that they were never planning to put the dwarves in anyways. I'm putting on a tinfoil hat for this one, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. This is just something I happened to notice while doing final touches on the video. I had a whole other section here finished where I talked about how they could have easily cast little people as the dwarves anyways because something non-problematically written characters with dwarfism outnumbering the 7 dwarves, and something grumpy is already voiced by Martin Kleba, aka Marty from Pirates of the Caribbean anyways, and something the dwarves in the original weren't blatantly magic like the ones in the remake who have magic gemstone hands and are pushing 270. But we're talking about something else now because my big theory is that the dwarves aren't CGI because of backlash from people with dwarfism. It's because they panicked and had no time left to get live actors anyways. So for those who weren't there for this, after they rolled back on casting little people as the dwarves, this production image was either leaked or released to the public. Either way, people saw it. A new band of 7 bandit characters to take the dwarves' place. And, hang on a second, that's just Jonathan's bandit friends from the final movie. Disney didn't remove these 7 new characters, but also the dwarves. This is where the tinfoil hat comes in. I think what happened here is that Disney tried to backpedal on the 7 dwarves by making this brand new set of characters, and then people still got mad because you can't do a remake of the iconic Snow White and the 7 dwarves without the 7 dwarves, and since this movie was probably spending too much time in production hell as it is, instead of opting to cast 7 new live actors, they went the quick and easy route of just casting voice actors and making the dwarves CG. That way, they could easily insert them into the final film without having to worry too much about reshoots. Considering how this movie is one of Disney's most expensive films, it makes sense why they'd want to cut corners to appease fans of the original any way they can so they don't lose ticket sales. Anyways, the dwarves get back to the cottage. It plays out similarly enough to the original movie, but it's less funny. And also they very much want to set up Dopey as getting a character arc in this movie, as he's the first one to properly meet Snow White. I will get back to Dopey later, because boy howdy did they massacre my boy. The dwarves decide to house her, but unlike the original, they'll only house her for the night, and then she has to leave. And then we cut back to the queen. Insert Apple scene I already ragged on here, and while sentencing the huntsman to the dungeon and ordering the rest of her guards to find Snow White, she gets a song, All Is Fair. And y'all, how did this thing make me miss Emma Watson in Beauty and the Beast? Boy golly gee, here I go! It wasn't horrible. I thought the lyrics and composition were fine. As a villain song, it's serviceable. The only issue I have with it is Gal Gadot's performance. I've been avoiding talking about this because Gal Gadot's inclusion in this movie is a whole can of worms I didn't want to open, considering I didn't want to touch on politics, just the movie and all the things the movie got wrong. I'll talk about her acting though, because that is part of what this movie got wrong. I feel like Disney was trying to be strategic here because the evil queen in this movie carries herself in such a way where you can disguise Gadot's bland acting as just her being nonchalant about all the awful things she's saying and doing, which fits the character. But then there's some moments where her having more emotion would have really helped and she just doesn't deliver. I said enough! That's the best delivery they could get for a scene where she's ordering Snow White to stop making people want to overthrow the queen, by the way. For her vocal performance, the same applies. Someone should have vocally coached her a bit more. On top of that, funny I should bring up Emma Watson's performance in Beauty and the Beast, because you know what that has in common with Gal Gadot in this movie? Blatant auto-tune. There's low notes in the song where it's obvious she was pitch corrected in post, and it's just Ew. All it would have taken was some extra time vocally training Gal, or just adjusting the melody in the song so she could hit the notes, and I'm sure she would have killed it. Because that's another thing, this song is a alright villain song. Lyrically and melodically, it sounds fine. It just needs better vocals. Here, I'll prove it. All is fair when you wear the crown, a little perk that your power provides. If they dare speak up, swat them down. She with the diamonds decides. Blessed with grand features like these kingdoms, hand over their keys, claim your prize. If you wanna rise, someone's gotta fall. Darling, all is fair when you're the fairest of all. Also, it kind of sucks that they used all the creative choreo juices on this scene only. They can't afford more than like 5 different camera shots for the main character's most important song of the movie, but they can shell out all the cool choreo for this. After the Queen's number, we go back to the cottage where the dwarves are eating or something. Dopey gets embarrassed after gruel gets dropped on his head and the other dwarves laugh at him. This is where possibly my least favorite change is revealed. Dopey doesn't talk because he's too afraid to. Not because he can't talk, like in the original, but because the other dwarves make fun of him so much that he's too scared to talk for fear of them making fun of him. I think this is less of a factual thing and more of a me thing, but like, I feel like it costs you $0 to keep him mute because some people just are. You already butchered my boy Star for the sake of, well, when we made him a mime character, it made writing him so much more fun and liberating. Yet you couldn't do the same for the character who, need I remind you, was already mute. I know I sound like a hypocrite criticizing this when I made Star talk in my own rewrite, but I have an excuse. I'm a bad writer. I'm not a professional. I came up with the funny lines for Star, had trouble killing those darlings, and couldn't commit to making him mute like I'm sure a more talented team of writers would have been able to. And you know for a fact that Disney can afford writers more talented than me. And you can still have Dopey's character arc be about learning to be more self-confident. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a rather adorable arc for a character like Dopey. But why is that arc only able to be realized by having him talk? And the movie even has a whole thing about Snow teaching him to be more confident by teaching him how to whistle instead of talking, so he can whistle when he's sad to cheer himself up or something. It's cute, just keep it there, you don't need to go further than that. He doesn't need to talk. After this, we get Whistle While You Work, but instead of it being the initial, oh man, you guys do not know how to keep a house song, it's about how the dwarves made a mess during a fight they had, and now Snow is gonna make them tidy it all up and work together, because that's the whole theme of the movie, it's working together and being kind to each other, and Snow doesn't do anything to help. In the original, she was giving orders to the animals and telling them how to clean up, but she still pitched in to help. Snow in this movie just sings and dances around while telling off the dwarves for not getting along. And I get it, breaking stereotypes, Snow's a girl boss, but just because someone's the boss doesn't mean they don't still do some of the work. After this number is all done, Snow White finds Jonathan in the woods. I could not tell you how, I just know she does. And then Jonathan gets a song called Princess Problems. Oh boy. When I heard the name of the song before seeing the movie, I assumed it would be some condescending number about Snow White being a prissy princess and how she can't possibly be strong and fight this threat because you woman, but it's not that. It's worse. The song is about how, oh boo-hoo, you're sad, people aren't nice to each other, people are starving, Snow, grow up. This is coming from a guy who can't even steal potatoes and is only there to sing this song to her because Snow risked her life to untie him from the front gates of the palace instead of leaving him to die of exposure. Which I'm sure he wouldn't have done if the roles were reversed because, again, oh boo-hoo, you're sad, I can't help you, I have other people who need my help, I can't be sticking my neck out for like-minded strangers. Have I mentioned that I hate Jonathan? I get the whole point of this remake is emphasizing being kind to each other even in the face of oppression, and you gotta have at least one dude who obviously needs to learn that lesson, but the writing of Jonathan's character sucks butts. His romance with Snow doesn't get any kind of build-up either. It's worse than my writing of Asha and Chance in the Wish video. We go from him literally downplaying her concerns about the world and low-key calling her stupid for wanting people to be nice to each other, to the next scene literally taking an arrow for her while he and his other bandit friends fight off guards. Boy, you've known her for like a day. Also, sorry to nitpick, but why didn't you do literally anything else before deciding jumping in the way of the crossbow bolt was the way to save Snow? Didn't think to grab her and pull her down and out of the way, maybe? He doesn't even shove her out of the way or something. He jumps in the way of the crossbow bolt. What if that thing went right through you and still hit Snow? It's giving that scene in Mulan 2020 that stunned Jiranjie Zhao into silence for 20 seconds straight. Snow and the bandit gang take Jonathan back to the dwarf cottage. Doc does his best, but he has a Dr. Doppler moment of, well, I'm a doctor, but I'm not that kind of doctor. But he's still able to help Jonathan regardless. Then we get the literal 1 minute of silly song before Snow and Jonathan have their love song. Again, you guys have known each other for like a day, and based on your interactions, I don't believe you're in love for a second. Not only is Jonathan's writing already bad, but it makes Snow White's writing in this movie worse, because you can't convince me that she's genuinely in love with a guy who sang a whole song to her earlier that day that was the Disney equivalent of, Kim, there's people that are dying. Yeah, he took an arrow for you, but that's because you're literally the princess and the daughter of the king they are fighting in the name of. Of course he tried to keep you from getting killed. You're a figurehead to this man, Snow. Dump him. Jonathan and his band of bandits soon depart because Jonathan wants to try and find out where the king is. And remember that necklace Snow has with the white girl tattoo nonsense on it? She gives it to him for good luck or something. I can't remember. He has it on his person, that's what's important. Anyways, he immediately gets captured. I am not surprised. Not only did they set up that they're not really bandits and just theater performers who lost their jobs, but Jonathan overall is written as just some guy who talks big but doesn't have any of the skills to back it up. I don't believe this was on purpose, I think they just wrote him badly. His grand plan to keep Snow from getting shot was to jump in front and take the arrow for her while he could have pulled her to the ground. Jonathan's dumb as a rock. He gets taken back to the queen and tries to lie about knowing where Snow is, but the idiot is wearing the necklace instead of keeping it tucked away in a bag or a pocket. So of course they figure out he's lying, and since the guards know exactly where in the woods they found him, it's only a matter of time before they can find Snow. Jonathan gets locked in the same dungeon as the huntsman, and the queen goes into her much less cool looking evil dungeon and brews up her disguise potion like in the original. And she sings! Again! It's still bad. One thing I feel I gotta point out is that this was the one clip I saw of the film before going to see it myself, and the clip posted online cuts off right before here as she goes down the stairs, so I thought the entire old hag transformation happened off screen. I made a funny Discord meme about it and everything. But this is why you see things in full first, kids, because that's not what happens. We see the queen change while she keeps singing the reprise of her song, and it still looks bad. This is why the medium of animation is so good for these sorts of things. You can really exaggerate the changes to add to the scariness of it all. And then here the changes are too subtle and I don't even realize she's turning old until her hair goes white and like kind of explodes out of her hood. The fingernails creaking while they lengthen as she holds the apple was kind of neat, I guess. I'm trying my best here, guys. You know I like to point out at least some good things about the bad movies I talk about, but this thing feels so soulless I couldn't grasp at straws if they were growing on trees. Also, the apple being poisoned looks dumb. Like, she just dips it in and it shrivels into the shape of a skull before, poof! It's a shiny red apple enticing you to eat it. In the original, the poison slowly seeps into the apple and looks almost like a symbiote bubbling over every inch of it. And when she pulls it out of the cauldron, the poison makes the skull shape as it drips off. That's cool. This looks stupid. Also, I realize I'm nitpicking a lot here, but this movie's existence makes me mad. Let me have this one. Why is her familiar a vulture? Did they misunderstand the original movie? Those two vultures show up because they know someone's gonna die. They don't work for the queen or anything. Her familiar in the original movie was a crow that's mostly there for slapstick. The vultures are there because it's cool to end off the scene of the dwarves chasing after the queen by having them circle overhead after the queen falls off a cliff and dies. Okay, back to the movie. The dwarves go away to work, Snow is left in the house, and she packs some stuff so she can leave further into the woods to find her dad. Then an old lady shows up at the door. Snow doesn't know it's the queen. Old hag asks if she's the princess. She begrudgingly says yes because homegirl has the self-preservation of one of the lemmings Disney threw off a cliff. And the hag's all like, oh, Jonathan's been captured by the queen, here's proof, and shows the necklace. Snow decides to postpone finding her dad so she can run to the castle and rescue Jonathan. But before she goes, the hag gives her the apple. The queen takes advantage of Snow's kindness and her wish for people to share and be kind to each other by saying, oh, it's not much, but let me give this to you to sustain you on your journey. Which I think is neat. Maybe in this rewrite she'll hold on to the apple for a little bit like a Chekhov's gun and then get sleepy deathed later. Either way, the change makes more sense in this context of the rewrite than the original scene from the original film would have. In the original film, the queen is posing as an apple salesman because she finds Snow White making a pie and is like, oh, apple pies are all the rage. Try this one and see if you want to buy the rest and bake with them. Something like that. but she further entices Snow to eat it by claiming it's a magic wishing apple, and her dreams will come true with one bite. Not Snow's brightest moment. I myself am more inclined to suspend my disbelief on Snow's part, since she's 1, a child, and 2, neither her nor the dwarves are aware the queen is even looking for her, let alone knows where she is. Obviously, it's not something they can bring into this new film, because Snow knows full well the queen is looking for her. Her love interest just got shot by a royal guard just the day before, so her falling for the wishing apple trick would be stupid. Good thing she's not stupid. Anyway, she takes a bite of the apple immediately and dies. For the life of me, I can't think of any justification for this. The hag wasn't being pushy about her eating it now, and it's not like Snow gave any indication of being hungry, like, right now. Did she want to take a bite out of it to show that she'd really be eating it to sustain herself on her journey so the old lady would feel better? Because if so, that's not very realistic of this movie. One bite and that apple won't save as well as it would have if she just saved it until she was actually hungry. My only assumption is that the writers had the checklist for things to happen and they were like, well, the queen gave her the apple, now she has to bite it. That, or they didn't want to have to deal with the queen again being pushy, like, oh, you should eat it now, because that'd be too suspicious. With how this lady can't even check a box before declaring Snow White dead, I don't expect her to be smart enough to let her plan just kinda happen. She couldn't have put an extra enchantment on the apple to make it extra enticing, you know, like the bright red sheen to make it look extra fresh and delicious. Also, this could have so easily played out like it did in Enchanted. Enchanted does a lot to poke fun at classic Disney princess elements, and the apple I felt was done well there. Like in the original Snow White, Giselle is convinced that the apple is magic and taking a bite of it will fix her problems. But unlike Snow White, where it's like, oh, it's a wishing apple or whatever, this is a moment where Giselle is at her lowest and is so desperate to do whatever she thinks will make things better. Maybe the evil queen could have done that here, convincing Snow White that the apple would give her extra strength to storm the castle and rescue Jonathan. Either that or she doesn't eat it yet, so it just sits on her person and, like I said earlier, serves as a Chekhov's gun. She can eat it later in a much more intense situation, so there's extra stress to try and save Snow White and kiss her, you know? Granted, just like the original film, no one knows the true love's kiss breaks the spell, but they're changing pretty much everything else in this awful movie. They could have maybe made one of the dwarves know magic. Anyways, the queen rubs salt in the wound here to really nail in how awful she is, because this is the scene where we get the reveal that the queen killed the king. She doesn't say how, and we never find out how, just that she killed him. She tells Snow White as she's dying, which is the pettiest thing she could have done, honestly. It's one of the few writing decisions for the queen that makes sense in this film. Of course this jerk would be like, well, she's dying anyway, better let her know she never had a chance of finding her father and changing anything to really make sure she suffers as she goes. Anyways, the animals alert the dwarves to something being wrong, just like the original, and the dwarves rush home, but they're too late! Aside from Dopey and this one squirrel that nestles into her skirt, the dwarves don't even look super sad. The CGI monstrosities just kinda look like, welp, she's dead, that sucks. Dopey's the only one allowed to be sad because he's the only one in this movie we know more than one thing about. Quick shot of the queen being all, heck yeah, I'm the fairest in the land, before we get the funeral scene, which is another entry in the Geeky Gets Anxious because this looks like Mid-Journey adventure that is this movie. This wake for Snow White feels soulless. The original had the organ music, it had the low lighting, she was laid in a bed as if it were a coffin, and we had Grumpy and Dopey doing full body sobs. Here, they lay her on a rock in the woods where the lighting is so bright it activates my fight or flight again, and we get uncomfortably long shots of the dwarves' awful CGI faces. Grumpy especially, which, again, Dopey's the only one we know more than one thing about. Why does Grumpy get the drawn-out face shot and not Dopey? And they do keep Dopey's full-body sobs, by the way. It's just in a far-out shot so you barely notice it. Seriously, when the camera needs to be doing things in an important scene in this movie, it just doesn't. It sucks. Back at the castle, Jonathan and the huntsman break out because something teamwork and helping your fellow man in desperate situations or something. Because, you know, Snow White couldn't have saved him first, and then we had the apple death scene, whatever. They wanted a girl boss, but not too much, I guess. Jonathan runs off to find Snow, and somehow he finds this secluded funeral in the middle of the woods. Never do they explain how he finds them, but he's so distraught at her being dead that he kisses her as a last goodbye, and then, hooray, she's alive, woo. Yeah, don't you love how they wrote Snow White as a girl who can save herself when she gets herself poisoned and killed in a way that's somehow stupider than the original, and still has to be saved by her male love interest? Whatever, she's alive again. The revolution now has its figurehead and rightful heir to the throne. Well, figuring out what to do next, Dopey talks. He says they won't be afraid of the queen anymore. Get it? Because Dopey's not afraid to speak anymore? Therefore the others shouldn't be afraid to rebel anymore? Hooray! They make a plan off-screen before storming the castle with the help of the village people, and How did this garbage movie build up a revolution plot better than Wish did? Snow White tells the people that the queen killed the king and tries to get them on her side instead of the queen's. But the queen uses a metaphor that she's been using since the start of this movie. That Snow is a rose and the queen is a diamond. Both are beautiful, but Snow White is a delicate ruler. They need someone hardened like the queen, strong like a diamond, able to protect them with an army. Not some soft flower that'll wilt under pressure. Missed opportunity to have Snow clap back with "you forget a flower has thorns" or something, but I don't expect this movie to be clever. And she's finally able to win everyone, including the guards, over by calling them by name. Whereas the queen until this point had just been going like, "you, kill her" and stuff. Treating the people like playing pieces on a chessboard. Snow is not just a leader, she is their friend. She knows them. Scarily similar to how I wrote Asha in my rewrite video. I'm not saying anything, but my video did come out a couple months before this movie did. I'm just kidding. The first teasers of this thing dropped in August. They had the script finished long before my video even existed. This is just a case of creative coincidence. Anyways, the queen finds herself outnumbered and is outraged and storms into the castle to her mirror room to ask if she's the fairest in the land. Because if anything, she can still cling to that, right? But the mirror is like, nah, Snow White is still the fairest in the land. And the way he phrases it implies that the queen was misinterpreting the meaning of fair this whole time. Snow White isn't more fair because she's prettier than the queen. She's more fair because she's more kind. She is a fair and just ruler. Oh, neat! That's stupid. Does this imply that the queen was somehow more fair earlier in the film because she had nothing to compete with? You're telling me Snow being complacent and not trying to make her life more difficult by sneakily helping when she was literally locked away in the castle means that the queen was more fair? Homegirl was stuck being a scullery maid. I refuse to believe that she wasn't at least more kind to the people around her than the queen was. Don't come at me with that victim blaming garbage. The mirror, I think, was just actively trying to throw the queen off. And then Snow walks in, even though we've never been clued into her knowing this room exists. Just in time to see the queen smash the mirror out of anger, and then the queen disintegrates and gets sucked into the mirror. Her whole death scene is super weird. I don't know what's going on here. Have the village people push her off a castle wall so she dies by falling like in a proper revolution, you cowards. Snow White is now the kingdom's ruler, and we cut to the village people celebrating, and then it's revealed that the movie's narrator, the movie has a narrator by the way, was dopey the whole time. Yay. We get a reprise of where the good things grow and then the movie ends. So that's Snow White 2025. Definitely not the worst live-action remake, though to be frank, it's hard to make something worse than Mulan 2020, or to butcher the original film's messaging as much as Lilo and Stitch. Boy, do I have thoughts on Snow White, though. My big one that I think I'll start with: this shouldn't have been a Snow White movie. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, as you can guess from my not-so-quick summary of this thing, they changed so much of this story that aside from the main identifiers, this could have easily been changed into an original fantasy IP. They barely reuse any of the old songs from the original, and the ones that they do reuse, they rewrite almost all the lyrics and recontextualize them. Either that or pull a live-action Be Prepared and neuter them like they did with Silly Song. Plus, I feel like remaking Snow White in the way they tried here was doomed from the start. Girl bossifying Snow White doesn't work unless you change almost everything about the original story to the point that you're better off just making an original movie in the first place. And even then, stuff like the poison apple needs to be kept for it to be identifiably Snow White, so trying to have her save herself falls flat when she still eats the apple and still has to be rescued by the prince. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you're already changing around and throwing away so much from the original, why not go all the way and make this a wholly original IP? It would have left everyone way less mad and maybe the film wouldn't have flopped. Plus, I know I would have loved to see an original fantasy film about a princess running away to help her people start a revolution against her evil stepmother. That's cool as hell! I was originally gonna propose ideas for this, but the more I thought about how this could be reworked into an original IP, the more I just went like, yep. But Disney wants those big bucks, and as one of my professors has told me, it's easier to get a project greenlit if it's based on a pre-existing IP, because that means there's already an audience willing to go see it. Alright, fine. Disney wants to keep the name attached. I'll indulge them. But in that case, let's talk about the 2015 Cinderella remake, shall we? Because that's a movie I don't see talked about when people rag on these remakes, and for a good reason, I think. It's the only one that does it right. Cinderella 2015, in my opinion, isn't an adaptation of the original 1950 Cinderella. It's adapting the original source material again, and doing its own thing with it. The only similarities I can find between this and the 1950 film are like names being reused, her dress getting torn to prevent her from going to the ball, and maybe her being locked in the attic later. Everything else? It's taken from the original fairy tale. They even have that thing of the footmen being lizards instead of a dog and a horse like in the 1950 version. Not to mention the designs and costuming is different enough that you can't really conflate the two movies. The most you can argue is Cinderella's dress being blue like in all the advertising because, fun fact, Cindy's dress in the original movie is actually white. But aside from that, her outfit is entirely different. And the film isn't even a musical like the 1950 film. In all ways except for like 3, maybe 4 elements, this movie is entirely its own version of Cinderella that can stand independently from the 1950 film. Compare that with Snow White 2025, where the costumes are identical to the original, where the dwarves' names, designs, and personalities are identical to the original, where they reuse songs from the original. Yeah, you see what I'm saying here, right? If they insisted on making this story a Snow White remake, I feel like it would have been better if they gave it a lot more degrees of separation from the original 1937 film. Change up the costume designs, make the dwarves different and original characters, make an entirely new musical soundtrack instead of writing a few new songs and then reusing 3 from the original with almost entirely rewritten lyrics. Then maybe, I wouldn't be as mad at this movie's existence. It's either that or make it its own original movie. Do something that doesn't scream, hey, remember Walt Disney's first full-length animated feature and how beloved it is? Want to see us fix it because it's bad and has problems? Alright, I need to wrap this up. To conclude, Snow White 2025 isn't horrible and brings some interesting things to the table in terms of story. It's just the fact that these interesting ideas are stuck in an awful Disney live-action remake that was made for rather mean-spirited purposes. It would rather make money by tying itself to an original IP in any way it can, while simultaneously wanting to stand on its own legs in ways it fundamentally can't by the nature of adapting Snow White. Disney wanted to have their cake and eat it too, and it bit them in the butt. Rachel Zegler deserved a better movie to be the main lead on. Hope you guys enjoy me rambling about this film and trying to give my thoughts on it, even though it's probably better off forgotten and unacknowledged at this point. Hopefully next time I can make a video on something more fun and enjoyable. Alright, bye.